At the mic. Good morning. Sorry about the delay. The Finance Committee meeting will be called to order at 10:43. All are present, that being Alderwoman Finlayson to my right and Alderwoman O'Neill to my left. At this time, I'll accept a motion to amend the agenda.
Madam Chair, I'll move to amend the agenda to include a presentation from Public Works Director Gerald on AR, I never get the acronyms correct.
AMRP?
AMRP.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. At this time, I will accept a motion
All in
to...
favor.
Oh, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of Wednesday, November 2nd?
Move approval of the minutes from November 2nd as written.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you very much for these minutes. So I will proceed now with legislation. We have one, just for scheduling purposes, we have one piece of legislation to review, and then we can have your presentation, and I'll assume that is part of the Finance Director's presentation as well. And we do have a hard stop at 12:30, but I think we can do it. So the ordinance in front of us is O31-22, titled Revenue and Finance Budget, Annapolis Communities Grant Programs, for the purpose of requiring that all recipients of city community grant funds have proof of nonprofit status, clarifying definitions, adding acceptable proof, expanding requirements for grantees, and generally dealing with community grant allocations. This ordinance is a product of the Finance Committee's list of recommendations in our finance report, where we asked, adhering to City Code 6.16070, that we receive quarterly reports from nonprofits seeking community grants. But this goes into further detail of those requirements. May I ask, would the sponsor like to just reintroduce this, and then we'll, my understanding is that the postponement was due to, we would like to amend it. That amendment isn't complete yet, but I'd like it to be open for discussion so that we all agree on, number one, I want to agree on where this is now in the city structure and where it is going to be under the city structure to ensure that these requirements in the code are met. And that will involve, I think, Director Dickinson and City Manager Malinoff. So, Alderman O'Neill, would you like to just give us a briefing of the genesis of this?
Sure. So it started, one, to provide more transparency in how the community grant program is operated, and the grantees' requirements, one, showing their proof of nonprofit status. Also, there's always been in the codes a requirement for reports and where those come, what those reports consist of. So maybe perhaps making some alterations to how those reports are completed and what's in those reports for future recommendations on the community grants. And so this really just opens up the whole process so that everybody knows exactly how to apply, what they need to apply, and that the grant committee can then be looking at across the board very similar applications from everyone.
Thank you. So what this does do is go back to 6.16 and deletes that language and then redefines. Let me just make sure. And the other thing that we neglected to say is that it has clarification on the faith-based applicants that was never addressed before.
Correct. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at all caps. So, Alderwoman Finlayson, would you like to explain the genesis of the amendment?
Yes, the amendment that I am planning to introduce, and clearly, Madam Chair, I'm willing to introduce this on the floor for the full council. I didn't realize it was going to be on our agenda. Usually we have a month to get our amendments in for committees, but we've pushed and had the discussion about who oversees the grant recipients in the course of the year. That responsibility has moved from someone in the mayor's office when we had over $800,000 in grant money, to the finance department, to the city manager's office. And so in this language, or in this ordinance, I would hope we would codify where it sits, and that being in the city manager's office. I understand in the job description that's been posted for the assistant, that is part of the responsibility. I'm always the one to say we can't put more work on a full plate. So we just need to be clear on who can manage this. Excuse me. I had a conversation with the city attorney this morning, and he wants to sit down and, with my impetus, of course, to figure out the legal sufficiency and to make sure that it's very clear as to where the responsibility lies.
And may I add that part of that responsibility is the section of the code that is unchanged, where a committee is set up to review the applications, very, I guess the word is objectively, et cetera. And I'm looking at, if you want to follow me, it's under the first.
Are we on page 2?
Yeah, page 2 of the new ordinance, B, subject to the availability, oh no, that's not it. C, there shall be a committee convened to review and evaluate applications submitted to the City of Annapolis for an operating and/or capital grant by the criteria, da-da-da. The committee shall consist of da-da-da-da-da. I have to say, I thought it was so professionally done last budget cycle, and I think that was out of the
Community services.
It was out of the community services group led by Aaron Lee. So I just want to.
Madam Chair, I think we should be clear that we have always had a committee made up of representatives from various departments.
Yeah, but the lead was there was a lead, and that was Aaron.
There's always been a lead. Laura or Aaron out of community services was the lead this time.
Right.
And again, that was something that was thrust on an already full plate. She's our social worker.
To my point, yeah, where is that going to be? Sorry to cut you off. But
Yeah, that's fine.
That's it.
Yeah, no, Madam Chair, members of the council, Michael Malinoff, City Manager. Obviously, I can't answer that question off the top of my head, but I'm certainly familiar with the way it had been organized in the past with somebody as the point, and with a new assistant hopefully coming on board, the closing date being the 19th. That may help. But I'm also meeting with Laura tomorrow, and I can discuss it with her as well. It may not be her appropriate area, but I'd like to get her input.
Okay. And Laura now being under what department?
Under mine.
Under your department
Yeah.
as well.
That was changed, I think, in the last budget.
Right,
cycle.
pulled out of the mayor's office.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, we have regularly, she just asked for them, and we've set up regularly scheduled meetings, and this can be something I'll bring to her attention and see. There may be somebody within hers, but when I get the assistant on, that can work
Okay.
to
So
that
you have the
advantage
floor.
too.
Madam Chair, I would move, with your indulgence, that we postpone action. Clearly, we need to clarify the line of authority. And it's really disturbing when we try to diminish the work of others, because we don't agree in some form or fashion. I think all of our employees do a great job no matter what they're asked to do, no matter what level of responsibility they already have. They step up and they do what is needed. We want to enhance their work. And I think we can do this with this legislation, which for the most part I don't oppose at all. I just don't like feeling like we have to attack what's been done in the past for the sake of improving things. We always improve things. So anyway, I would like to postpone this and give the law department an opportunity to work with me on how to make this stronger.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of postponement signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
So I think we've made it clear that we don't want this to be an afterthought. So next on the agenda is a presentation. And I before, come on up, and I just want to say, and my colleagues, I want input from the colleagues on my council. My concern in asking you to be here, and I did communicate with David, is as you know, we've been the council recently approved and Finance Committee reviewed several supplementary appropriations which had increased substantially due to inflation and lack of bidders and the whole environment. And my concern was, what are we doing to prepare for that? We're on the City Dock project. There's a number out there of $40 million, and I just want, my viewpoint was, is there any risk to that number? I don't know the details. Is it a guaranteed maximum price at this point? I don't know. But clearly, we can't ignore the fact that in this window of time that we'll be hit by inflation. And I just wanted your input on that. And then I think my colleagues had some other concerns. And Alderwoman Finlayson.
Thank you. I requested a presentation because I wanted to know the bottom line. I would like a one-page document that tells us what the entities will cost, what our responsibility, what the partner's responsibility, what the taxing implication, all of it. And I don't feel we've gotten it. We've gotten probably those numbers, and you've shared with us that those numbers are going to change. And I think we all understand that, especially in today's atmosphere, things are constantly changing. But we need a ballpark, and we truly need a bottom line. And so instead of having a presentation just to me, I checked with my colleagues, and they too had similar questions, and therefore the presentation before the full committee. So thank you for indulging me and us with this information.
Well, thank you. My name is David Jarrell. I'm the Director of Public Works. Eileen?
Eileen Fogarty, project manager for City Dock.
Your microphone's not on.
I'll change my name. Eileen Fogarty, City Dock Coordinator.
Jody Dickinson, Finance Director.
So we will give and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today, because we appreciate that, and we appreciate the providing the information you asked for, but also we'd like to provide an update of the project, where we are and where we're going. We were working on the concession agreement for a long time. It was a very complex document, as you all know. And so we successfully completed that in September, early September. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But what we're going to get out of this concession agreement or development agreement is a new parking garage, 588 space garage. The old Hillman garage was 425 spaces. The new garage is going to be 588 spaces. We needed extra space because the second thing we're going to get is the City Dock project. We're going to take parking out of City Dock and redirect it to the garage and have a large programmable space, green space at City Dock, but also have resilience at City Dock. We're going to be protected up to 5 feet for tidal waters and up to 8 feet for storm surge. So again, we'll get into that more in detail. So as I said, we completed the development agreement back in September and had financial close. Medco is the concessionaire, so none of the debt currently in place is on the city's books. So the city taxpayers are not on the hook at all currently for the debt. Now, when we refinance, and again, we'll talk about that more in detail, with the refinance, it's going to be paid for with revenue from the parking, both the garage and the adjacent parking area, but it will be GO debt. So if everything fails, then conceivably the taxpayer could have to bear that, but all of the revenue projections are very conservative, and we don't anticipate that. So how much debt was issued? $47.1 million of senior debt. So that was competitive debt that was rated debt that was issued by Morgan Stanley. So that's good debt. Let's put it that way. That's reasonably priced debt. We were a little bit nervous right before those bonds were sold, because the weekend before our bonds were sold, there was a big national withdrawal of money from the bond market. The bond market's been in turmoil for many, many months. And just before the issuance, there was a lot more turmoil because there were a lot of redemptions on bonds. But nonetheless, our issuance was actually oversubscribed, which means there was more demand than there were bonds available. So most of it was purchased by T. Rowe Price, a large Baltimore investment company, and they're going to use it for their Maryland tax-free bond funds. But Franklin Funds and others also purchased some of that debt. Then we also have $21.4 million of subordinate debt. So that's debt that we needed to issue in order to meet all of our requirements for the concession payment. So our expectation has been $25 million for a while, and that was our negotiating position, is that we needed to get $25 million. Yeah, please ask
just
questions.
for clarification, the 21.4 is in addition to the 47.1.
It is, yeah. So the total issuance was 68.6. Two very different issuances of debt, though. The 47 million was rated debt, so it had an investment grade rating from Moody's, and was issued to sell the bonds to companies like T. Rowe Price and others. The subordinate debt is actually the developer's sort of equity investment into the project. So that debt is from them, and then they're going to hold that debt until they see fit to either sell it or to hold it themselves. So that's unrated debt, which means it didn't have a credit rating by any of the rating agencies, and it's very expensive, as we'll talk about later. So we felt it was advantageous. It's like I think I mentioned during the last council meeting that we talked about this. It's like that's credit card debt, and we want to make it like a mortgage where it has a reasonable interest rate.
So that, I'm trying to explain, in case any public is listening, although this is taped and we'll refer people to this meeting. Presently, the developer holds that 21.4. So in simple terms, we're pulling it out. We got that approval from the city council to sell it and hopefully refinance it. That's a simple way of putting it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's correct. So that will basically buy out the developer from the deal.
And if we're unsuccessful, then it then we own that debt, is another way of putting it.
So it depends on how you define unsuccessful. So
We can talk about it later, I think.
yeah, I don't think we would be unsuccessful in issuing bonds.
In getting a better rate.
And we have the right to buy out debt. So we wouldn't fail because we couldn't, because that was something that we negotiated, was to be able to refinance that debt
Right.
up to 2 months past the substantial completion of the garage. So that's a timeline. It's advantageous for us to do it earlier than later because it's such expensive debt that we save money the sooner we do it.
So
Jody, did you want to add something on unsuccessful?
That's what I was going to say. I don't know what you meant by unsuccessful. When a city goes to
in
sell bonds, we
refinancing.
typically successfully sell those bonds, and a portion of those bond proceeds are going to help us refinance this debt, is the way I'll put it. So that's what I was going to ask. What did you mean by unsuccessful? I mean, it's possible we won't get as low of rates as we'd like to.
Right.
That'll be determined, it's going to be a competitive bid when we sell, but we are almost assuredly going to get much less of an interest rate than we currently have on this subdebt.
And the window of time to do that, which I'm just hearing now, is concurrent with the project and a couple of months later.
That's
So-
right.
Correct.
So we have until
Yeah.
2 months after substantial completion. Substantial completion is when the garage is completed enough for us to open it and start using it. Not all the punch lists will be I know you understand that, but a lot of others maybe don't. But we'll still have punch list items to take care of, but it will be usable.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's targeted for June. So we have 2 months past that. So, August timeframe we have to do this.
Alderman Finlayson has a question.
And I'm going to ask this question for both of the projects. Why would a developer want to take on this debt for us? And I think it's clear with the garage. We're giving them all the revenue from the garage itself with the additional 100 and some spaces. Plus, we're giving them a significant chunk of parking in Ward 1, in districts, 1 and 2?
Correct.
So that's clearly going to benefit the developer. Am I wrong in that?
So let's back up a little bit and we'll talk about how the revenue is going to flow. Okay, so revenue comes in from the garage and from the parking area. We just issued the senior debt, let me go back one, so I have the exact number.
21.4?
The 47.1 million is the
Of
senior
senior
debt.
debt,
So
okay.
that gets paid first. So those individuals that either invested in T. Rowe Price funds or directly purchased these bonds will get paid first. Okay, not the developer.
Okay.
The bondholders do. The second entity that gets paid is the entity that's operating and maintaining the garage and the parking area. So in that case, it's premium parking. So they're incurring costs in operating the garage and maintaining it and doing parking enforcement, doing all the things that they're responsible for. So they get paid next. And then the subordinate debt gets paid next. So third in the line to get paid with the revenues is the subordinate debt. The reason why they wanted to hold this is because and that's why it's expensive debt, because it's financially advantageous for them to have this debt to get paid, because the coupon value is 7.5 plus it's inflation adjusted. So it's a very advantageous interest rate for them. So that's why they wanted to hold on to that. And if the garage is successful and if the revenues turn out to be very stable, then that makes that even more financially lucrative to have that, because then potentially they could sell it at a gain for them. So that's why they want to hold it. They're sort of equity. They're sort of betting that the garage and the parking area will be successful, and that there will be enough of the revenues to pay them back for their loan to the city, to this project, for the $21 million. And that's essentially what they're doing. They're loaning the project $21 million, expecting to get paid back from the revenues, and think it's going to be stable enough, the revenues, to pay them back. So then after the subordinate debt gets paid, all the other revenues, the excess revenues, come to the city. That's estimated to be about $1 million per year. And that will go into the parking fund and would be available in the parking fund if transit needs revenue.
You knew that's where I was
to keep
going,
them
right?
operational. Yeah, so, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute, of what the implications are when we buy out the subordinate debt. Because that being very expensive, the payments from the revenue to pay for that subordinate debt are going to go down, right? Because it's less expensive once the city issues it, which means that there'll be more money available for the parking fund. Instead of $1 million, it'll be a bigger number. And Jody may know what that number is. How much we're going to save each year by buying out the subordinate debt. Does that all make sense?
No, you lost me. The 7 million.
I don't think 7 million, the 1 million that's coming in every year.
I got
about,
that 1 million.
That'll be a higher number.
So because the subordinate debt is so expensive to pay it back each year, by the city refinancing that and having a lower payment on that frees up additional money to go to the parking fund to help transit if needed.
So are we holding the subordinate debt, or is the agencies that you've listed, who's holding the
The
subordinate?
subordinate debt is AMRP, Amber
Okay, the
Infrastructure. That's the lead developer is Amber
Okay.
Infrastructure. They're a subsidiary of the Hunt companies. And so they're the ones that are giving the project $21.4 million, and then they will get repaid by that expensive cost that I was talking about. Each year, if we leave everything the way it is right now and don't refinance, they would get paid 7.5% plus an inflation adjustment for repayment of the debt that they're holding. So they're like a bond holder. Like somebody would buy bonds and they get paid back over time. The 21 million is Amber Infrastructure's contribution to the project. So that flows to the cost of the project, the concession payment, the garage, and then they would get paid back over 30 years.
So we at some point will go to the bond market and get the funding for the subordinate debt,
Correct.
correct? I
Yes.
see two heads shaking. I want to
Yes,
see.
That's
yes,
correct.
generally, yes.
So that was what
In a very short way,
you
yes.
approved that on Monday as part of
Yeah.
the overall financing.
Well, I guess then my next question becomes, then will the revenue from the garage and the parking cover the debt service that we will then be paying on the debt that we have assumed?
Yeah, so let's walk one more time through from the top. So there's enough money, the amount that's going to pay for the senior debt doesn't change, right? That's already sold. We know roughly what that's going to be. So that comes off the top. And then the payment to premium is going to be a fixed cost, generally a fixed cost. So that comes next. The payment that we would be making for the subordinate debt, let's say it's this big. It's a large amount because it's expensive debt. It's going to shrink, right? It's going to shrink when the city does the geo bonds because instead of paying roughly 9%, we're going to be paying maybe 5%. And that makes a big difference on $21 million.
But it is still a debt that we are acquiring, regardless.
It's going to be city geo bonds that are paid back by the revenue from the garage, just like the subordinate debt is going to be paid back from revenues from the garage. In a larger amount, it's going to be a smaller amount that's going to be paid by the city to pay off those bonds for the refinance. So it leaves a larger amount for the residual going into the parking fund and, if needed, into the transportation fund.
So is the assumption that the cost to us for those bonds is going to be covered with the revenue with an additional amount that we will be able to put in the parking fund?
Exactly. That's exactly correct, the way you stated it.
Okay.
Because right now the revenues are enough to cover the subordinate debt. The payment's going to be even less for the city. So that frees up money to add to the $1 million that we estimated for for transit or for parking, that'll be a bigger number.
And if there isn't, this is my last question, I promise. If it isn't sufficient, then it is transit that would not have the benefit of those additional dollars, and therefore we would have to rely on the general fund.
So that number, if it changes or varies, the 1 million plus whatever the savings is from refinancing, that goes into the parking fund. So the parking fund would be the first to feel the effects of that. Whether there would be enough money from all of our other parking operations to still support transit would have to be determined. But it's the parking fund that loses revenue first if we don't fully realize the revenue that we expect.
Okay, and maybe, maybe you already presented this to us, but have we gotten the data on all the other, our garages, the other 4 garages, and what revenue we will be gaining through those garages? And is there sufficient funding to use in transit?
That's a Jody question.
Yes, so during this process, I did an analysis of those other assets, and those other assets' revenues are adequate to cover their expenses, plus there was an anticipated excess there. I don't remember the amount, I'd have to look that up, but there is enough revenue coming in to cover the expenses there, plus there was an amount that would cover the some of the transit operations. And it's probably, if I remember correctly, it's somewhere around $1 million from those resources as well.
Okay, so in a best case scenario, we may have 2 million for transit
Or more,
or more. Okay, I'm good, thank you.
in the best case scenario, but, you know.
Yeah, best case.
We don't know how parking revenues, that's 30 years of projections, so.
Well, Madam Chair, we might want to ask transit to give us just an update on how our garages are doing. Now, with the fact that Hillman is down and people are being forced into the other, encouraged into the other garages, just for sake
Yeah,
of
well,
information.
That was the goal,
Thank you.
to redirect into the underutilized garages. So the structure, the financial structure that you're speaking of is just for Hillman, correct? I mean,
So it's for Hillman plus the $25 million concession
That
payment that
25
goes
that
to
goes-
City Dock. So
okay.
that's the only involvement in this deal, besides that we're having the same team implement the project. But financially, the only contribution to City Dock is the $25 million concession payment from the garage.
So I'm AMRP, and I sit down with you to negotiate, and I say to you, I'm giving you a free garage. I'm building a garage, right? That's my cost. I'm AMRP. I'm really trying to dumb this down for myself here. So I'm building this garage for you for 30 years. I'm managing it, so I have that operating cost. What other costs? Number one, are all of their costs fixed at this point? I assume it's just, I don't know, is it just Whiting Turner and premium underneath them on this agreement?
Plus VIA. VIA is doing the on-demand mobility.
All that stuff.
So that's
Okay,
part
so
of it too.
Okay, so,
Yeah, so we have a GMP, we don't, AMRP has a GMP with Whiting Turner for the garage. And
right.
so they're operating under that.
And for
So
my
they're
colleagues,
they're
that's-
getting paid as
Yeah.
we get the bond proceeds, they're getting paid
and
for
that's
their
a
work.
good thing. A GMP is a guaranteed maximum price without any scope add, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, and they set up some reasonably good contingency amounts too for different types of things. So they're managing that. So that's part of the GMP is some contingency. So they're working under that. We do not have a GMP yet for City Dock because that's still under design,
Right,
and
and
the
that's-
scope of that is still in
Yeah.
flux.
So it seems like you walked away from that meeting kind of gulping and saying, well, rats, but you protected, for lack of a better word, the $1 million waterfall. with this high interest.
Our goals were to protect $1 million plus the $25 million concession agreement.
That's really important to know. And congratulations. But you gulped and said, we can do better. And
Right.
so concurrently then we're making this effort. So it will improve things. I have to ask this because I'm privy to it, and I don't know if it's true. I have to talk about premium. I understand from the meeting last night, I kept hearing them say, well, we didn't have, not these words exactly, but basically they underestimated the scope of work involved. And they're asking, for more people and all of that. Is that, number one, is that true? And number two, does that affect our waterfall payment that we should be concerned?
So what we're talking about, I think, is parking enforcement, the number of people they have to do parking enforcement. Typically, parking enforcement employees pay their salary about 3 times over by ways you can imagine, by issuing tickets. So we don't feel like that's going to be a hit on, because whatever additional costs there are in that O&M piece comes out of the waterfall. So we asked them to increase the number of people for parking enforcement, anticipating that it's going to result in more tickets and more revenue. But we needed to do that, right? So even if it takes a slight hit on the waterfall payment, it's worth it. We need, I think you'll agree, we needed to do that. We needed to add parking enforcement.
But it's important.
Premium Parking did not know Annapolis all that well, so they when they give pricing to the developer, AMRP, they did it based on 2 people. But we think they need more, so we've asked them to staff up and do full parking enforcement.
With the logic that it will
They'll pay for
itself,
themselves,
if you
because
will.
parking enforcement always does.
Yeah, and just for the public to know, the reason that I understand we went to premium to enforce this piece was that it is part of the financial structure. You think of District 1 and District 2 as an extension of the garage for 30 years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't choose premium parking. We chose the team, the developer.
Right.
So we chose Amber Infrastructure. We chose Hunt Companies. We chose all of the team. And premium parking was the parking manager that was proposed with the AMRP team. So that wasn't a choice necessarily by us. We chose the overall team. And they seem like capable parking managers.
Right.
So it's been a learning curve. It was a learning curve when SB Plus took over. They took over a lot of new responsibilities, on-street parking that weren't contracted before. So that was a learning curve. It's been a learning curve with premium, but we're going to get through this, and they are a reputable parking manager, and they'll do fine after they get fully staffed and on the ground.
Yeah, but I'm grateful that you said that with the understanding that the additional enforcing people will hopefully pay for itself. Can you indulge me for a second? I know this is on the garage, but I just need to know, right now also we are designing, AMRP has these subcontractors under them, or consultants for City Dock, right?
Right.
And where's that money coming from right now? Are we just using the 25 million concession?
We are. So we collectively carved out about 2.5 million of the concession payment to pay for the project design. So Whiting Turner's leading that. They have a great team of design firms that are working with them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was carved out of the concession payment.
And it's important for the public to know that AMRP team is also, as we speak, designing City Dock.
Correct.
Okay.
And we are going to reach out to the public to bring them in on the process. That's one of Eileen's principal
Right now,
responsibilities
yeah.
to help give us input on that. And plus, we're going to go through, through the Planning Commission and HBC process as well. So there'll be opportunities for public input then too. So that sort of segues into this next slide, which is the $40 million number. I have to tell you, this is the number that was in the AMRP bid 2 years ago, pre-COVID. So it's going to go up. There's no doubt. It's just a matter of how much. So right now, Whiting Turner is refreshing by going out and getting pricing from subs, refreshing that number. So we'll know relatively soon, within the next probably 60 days, what that new number is. But for now, we're just saying 40 plus. So we talked about the $25 million concession payment. We got $10 million from the state of Maryland as part of their capital budget during the last budget cycle. So we have that available. We got $3.2 million from the Federal Economic Development Agency for the project. And then we got 1.125 of earmark money from Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen. We have a large grant application in, or soon to go in. It's with MEMA now, but it's going to go to FEMA soon for additional funding, resilience funding from FEMA. And this is such a perfect project for that FEMA funding, so we're confident that we'll get another chunk of money. We're still hopeful that we may get some money from the Resilience Financing Authority, which was, first passed in order to help this project, but it's kind of dragged. So we think we may get some money from them as well. So that's where we are on
Who's
funding.
leading the effort on the FEMA? Is that OEM?
OEM and Public Works are working, yeah. So Lisa and Dave Mandel are working together on that.
And the state of Maryland, that's for fiscal year 2023?
23, yeah. And so when we got that, they were interested in our first year expenditures. So they wanted to phase fund. So there's a possibility, again, we have a change of governor. Hopefully that will help this process even more. But that was intended to just be the first tranche of money from the state. So we didn't put anything else because we can't count on it, but we should be able to go back and get some FY24 money as well. So the garage is moving along. It's on schedule. They're working on the third floor now. Within the next 30 days, they'll be starting to pour the decks on the fourth deck. The good news is we're out of the ground. That's where you always have change orders for unforeseen site conditions is the subsurface conditions, and we're out of the ground and going vertical now. Things are moving well. I always say Whiting Turner is a world-class construction company, and they're showing it on this project. They're performing very well. Hillman Garage, the bottom line, Hillman Garage in the GMP is $28.4 million.
Thanks very much, David. I wanted to share with the Finance Committee the good news, which is we are more than halfway through the entire City Dock design and construction process. We started March of 2019. We have about 6 months left to go on the garage, and the design for City Dock is well underway. So what's amazing, if you think about it, the city is right on schedule. We'd have all those presentations with council, would say, here's our schedule. The city is on schedule. So for everything.
You might have said this, David, in that process of design development, what are we asking Whiting Turner for City Dock? Are we going to get a guaranteed maximum price from them on the City Dock project in its entirety?
Yes, yeah, it'll be a GMP. Since it's a design build, it'll be a GMP. Again, with some contingencies built in case, things always happen. But yeah, it'll be a GMP with contingencies.
So that will be hopefully in 60 days or something based on the design where it is projected to be, and that's what they're good at.
So as David mentioned, we have AMRP has several partners. They have Whiting Turner, which we've discussed. Premium Parking is doing the parking. VIA is, Annapolis Go is one of the mobility partners. We also have resiliency partners, design partners, and architects. So the parking and mobility piece of this, particularly in the interim, has been a critical piece. There's been a tremendous amount of success with the mobility portion. The city has succeeded in relocating almost 250 parkers out of the Hillman Garage to either, mostly to Park Place, but to outlying garages. But we've also seen the downtown business employees relocate to other monthly parking locations rather than just on the street. We've also had a lot of success, and let's take a look at the next slide, with the shuttle. We have captured more than triple what the shuttle had been doing for previous years. They're actually up to, I checked the numbers this morning, they're up to tripling the numbers, and that has been messaging to get visitors out of their cars at Park Place into the shuttle. People love the shuttle. It's magenta, everybody can see it coming. City's added another stop down on Compromise Street. It runs in 10-minute cycles. There will be extra shuttles available for Midnight Madness as well. So the shuttle has been a huge success, and we are, like I said, well over 8,000 passengers in the last month, which is tremendous for the shuttle. Next slide, please. VIA, you've seen these vehicles around town. They started in May, and it was the younger people, as you would anticipate, the students at the Naval Academy. But as it has grown in the last few months, right now they're actually a little over 6,000 rides. They are finally broadening out, where a lot of visitors are using VIA to, go from the hotel or the Park Place. And VIA will be running VIA shuttles, vehicles on Midnight Madness from 3 till 1 p.m., the first two Midnight Madness nights, and the third one from 3 to midnight. So VIA has really started to come into its own, but it's been a little bit of a slow process. While we're talking about Midnight Madness, I want to mention to the public that's watching, parking will be free downtown starting Thanksgiving through New Year's Day for 3 hours. All the commercial meters will be free, and the businesses, the city has given the businesses literally a few 100,000 customer validations, so that customers who go into, let's say, Zachary's or any of the downtown businesses, plus the restaurants, can get additional validation to park for 2 hours free at Gott's Garage. So plenty of parking, plenty of free parking downtown during the holiday. The resiliency approach is really being marveled, is maybe too strong an adjective, but we are being looked at nationally. We are getting calls from all over the country, and one of the reasons we have been so far successful, and we expect to continue to be in terms of grants, is that it's a unique approach. It's a small city. We are here with very, very serious flooding situation, and what we have done working hand in glove with the Naval Academy is a tiered approach, so that the entire area from Gate 1, Gate 0, all the way around to Newman Street is a line of defense. And there are 3 elements to the city's approach. First is actually raising the elevations to have a continuous bulkhead at 5 feet. Secondly are deployable barriers behind the bulkheads up to 8 feet. And third, let's look at the next slide. You've seen this image before, but it shows it very well. That 1.5 acre park is all raised, and that is one of the major aspects of our resiliency strategy. So you see the raised park in that image. You also see the white bulkhead, which will now be a good, in many cases, 3.5 feet higher. And let's look at the next slide. What you will also have, the areas that are either yellow or orange around Ego Alley are what we call deployable devices. They are devices that are passive, they're flush with the ground, but in times of flooding, they actually raise up. And if we look at the next slide, you can see it very well in this image. We have Ego Alley. Adjacent to Ego Alley, you'll see a little bit of discoloration in the brick. That is a deployable device. In times of a flood, if you look at the lower slide, this raises up another 3.5 feet, and it will look like the upper right-hand corner. We call it a pop-up. The device comes up, it doesn't flip out, but it pops directly up. So we have that around much of Ego Alley, and if you look at the next slide, this is an area by Donner Park that will be actually a glass and brick wall. So that will be the only area where you'll actually have a glass wall. And the last slide here, as I turn this over to Jody to go through all of her detailed information with you, is the most current rendering of Susan Campbell Park. Susan Campbell Park will be floodable. It will not be elevated, but it will be a combination of lush and natural environment for everyone to enjoy. Jody?
Wait. Could you go back to that slide with the showing the sections? And I think we all have questions on the one before that.
This one, yes.
Yeah, I guess that will work, but go ahead, Karma.
Actually, that's not my question. My question goes back to VIA, and I know that over the course of the last few months, we've talked about expanding VIA possibly out to like where the Giant is on Bay Ridge. Is that happening, or is there any discussion for that as an option?
VIA and the city had a meeting last week with Anne Arundel County. The new transportation director, who you all appointed, who's wonderful, Marcus Moore, met with his counterpart at the county to talk about what that would entail. So they are, when I say moving forward, they don't have a firm agreement yet, but they are working together, our transportation department and the counties, to look at how that would work, what the county would fund, because the county is very interested in having something like VIA for $2 a ride for people to be able to get to the mall or get to areas in the county.
Right. I continue to have people reach out to me from the Bay Ridge area, from Edgewood Roads, those areas that would love to come downtown. They're not coming downtown because of parking, because they basically drive past downtown to get to a parking garage. So if there's anything that we could do for city residents who live in those areas to get a VIA out there, even if it were a weekend VIA versus an everyday VIA, would be most helpful. Because
so what Marcus is looking at is having VIA not go all the way down Edgewood Road, but go to the Giant, pick up, have a place where people can just pop in their car, park at the Giant, and be picked up by VIA. And he has been looking into that. Do you know any more detail on it?
No, I know the concern was just the response time. So The VIA is actually a part of the developer team, so they're paying the cost, and it's $800,000. So it's sort of a zero-sum game that if we pull them in another area, we have to give it up somewhere else. So that's sort of the what we're going through is figuring out what value there is, and like going out to Edgewood, because we hear that that's a big concern area, or going to West Annapolis, or
Yeah, I mean, not even going down Edgewood, but to the Giant would be a huge positive, and it would attract some of those people that are now going to places like the town center and the mall, where we could attract them downtown.
Oh, absolutely. And in the meeting we had with VIA last week, Marcus Transportation was in that meeting as well. They are putting together, numbers and analysis to come back to the city to say, here's what we can do to serve these areas in the city.
I think let me just.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry. I think it's important to remind us that the VIA scope of work was during the duration of the garage being offline, period. And the objective was to alternative method to get people downtown. I think what's frustrating, and I hear it from my colleagues, is that they want that to continue. But it's called microtransit.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm hearing from David is, and in response to Alderwoman O'Neill's request is, yeah, we should, but we only have this $800,000 right now. So whatever we do to add, we're going to have to take it from somewhere else. I'm not sure what the question is in that. Is there any
Yeah,
flexibility?
so we've started discussions with VIA about that, because there's nothing that they would like more than to be able to continue here in Annapolis. I mean, they're getting their foot in the door and getting established, and now they would like to continue that. And I think we would like to as well. Mm-hmm. It's just identification of funding for that and figuring out how. And that's, I think, why we're talking to the county, to see if we could get some transit funding, grant funding from them to continue this. But Marcus is having those conversations with them already to figure out how we can keep them beyond next June.
Mm-hmm. And it all goes back to Alderwoman Finlayson's question about, are we generating enough revenue in these other garages, that would help that, argument. But go ahead.
May I piggyback on that? Because this speaks of inequity. Clearly we had raised the issue early on that via the boundaries, we're not treating all wards the same. There was clearly part of Ward 7 excluded, part of Ward 4 excluded. I don't know how we even went forward with an agreement knowing that we would deliberately cut out certain residents. And we've been raising the issue from day one, and I'm sorry that it hasn't risen to the top of importance. But you're hearing from others, and I'm hearing from folks that we're not trusting the city because they don't care about us out here, and that's not fair. And it's very difficult to engender support when they feel like they're being left out of opportunities in the city. So whatever needs to be done, and I think it goes above the director's level to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities in the city. We're putting it on Marcus or Mr. Moore as the director, but he can't make that decision. He can't bring the funding in unless he can develop a partnership. But has he had to do that for other wards? I don't think so. So I would hope that we'd keep a focus on being fair and equitable with everybody in the city when we're implementing whatever the program is. And this is just the perfect example before us right now. But sure, we'd like to keep it into the future, but right now we need to take care of our residents who are sitting here in front of us.
Absolutely, Alderwoman Finlayson. VIA is expensive, and when VIA started, the scope was all tied to the keeping it within 10 minutes in terms of being able to pick people up. But we've had a couple of meetings, and one last week, where the clear direction is VIA is starting to succeed now. For a while, early stages, it was mostly just, young people who were familiar with the apps who used it. But as it's starting to succeed, what we're hearing is everyone throughout the city, whether it's Edgewood Road or Ward 7, saying, hey, why can't I get VIA here? So a clear understanding now is if we're going to have it, we have to be able to make it available. How can we do that and keep within the 10-minute pickup time? If we're going to do that, do we need to add a vehicle? So that's what Marcus is getting an analysis from them on.
Okay, thank you. I'll look forward to hearing from him. Can we ask other questions before we go on?
Oh, yeah, I had a question. That's right, sorry. On
We'll go
the,
back.
It appears, and this is somewhat financial related, it appears that our top of elevation of the flood, the worst height scenario, if you will, varies. My understanding is that we ultimately want to protect up to 8 feet, but it's not built that way, and that we're allowing these, extensions as needed, whether it's the tilt, different terms and all that. Is that, are they all designed to go up to 8 feet eventually, or is it staggered?
So the base elevation is going to be 5 feet to protect from tidal flooding. For storm surge or for higher tides, the whole area is going to be protected, except for those that, so if you look at this sketch, anything that's outside of this, so like Susan Campbell Park, we're not going to run it all the way around there.
Right.
So that will be protected to the elevations that are shown there. But the entirety of the CDOC area is going to be protected up to 8 feet for storm surge. So through those pop-up barriers, some of them are fixed barriers, so it's protected all the time for that. Some of them are the pop-up type.
So, again, keeping.
And you have to
simple.
remember that a
Yeah.
really high tide like we had in Halloween of last year was
Yeah.
about 3.5.
Yeah,
So the 5 feet protects us for
yeah.
quite a bit of time. I mean, this is designed for 2050.
Right. So if we get a report that, God forbid, Hurricane Isabel equivalent is coming, then boom, everything, what that will look like is.
They automatically
it looks
will
like
pop up
yeah.
to the higher water level. So it's all buoyancy that makes those rise, and they do it as the water comes up. The protective devices will come up as well.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question, yes. Thank you. The Alex Haley Monument, I assume is still there?
Yes, and remember Alderwoman Finlayson, we also have, and we're waiting to get, there have been a lot of ideas given to the designers for them to come back and show how they can not only keep the Alex Haley Monument, but expand that theme throughout the park on risers and in other areas. And so we have not yet seen their drawings of how they're going to tie that theme throughout the park.
So we'll be privy to that before any decisions are made, I assume.
Absolutely.
What about the story wall?
It's still there. It's not going to be affected at all.
So is that outside? Because I don't see.
That's on the Eagle Alley side, and those are the different types. So most of these barriers are going to be pop up because the story walls there. They're going to be what's called flip up. So they're going to be like this, and then they'll rise. Instead of rising straight up, they're going to rise like this because the story wall's there, and we have to preserve that story wall.
Do you see where I'm talking about on this diagram? It
Yeah, it's
doesn't
that orange-
indicate
it's the
there's any
orange area.
protective.
It's the orange area along,
Yeah,
Compromise.
just beyond Donner Park.
yeah.
So it looks like the
right
barriers
here.
stop, right, yeah, exactly. So that diagram would indicate the pop-ups that you're referring to
Yeah.
there?
So that's the only area that's receiving those because the story wall's there and we have to protect that. Have to preserve the structure that's there.
The pop-ups, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my frame of reference, going to the Navy yard in DC, that's where the vice president lives. And they have these big barriers that come out of the ground, and go down when you're allowed to come in. So is that the kind of barrier we're talking about? And are they electrically, how
No,
are they
so they're
operated?
operate completely with the buoyancy of the water. So if you look at the top right there, so as the water comes up, they float up. So they don't require any activation. So they're not manually operated. They just come whenever the water comes up, they will pop up. And they're fairly maintenance free. They don't have to be, lubricated or anything like that. They just come up. So on the bottom right, I don't know how well you can see that, but that is a picture from Europe where they have a lot of these where it's actually deployed in that picture over this wall that's along here. That's a deployed one. If you look at this bottom one, that's a rendering of a deployed wall. And then up here, it's all you normally see when it's normal tides is just you'll be able to see the line of the top of the barriers. So the difference is that these are sealed concrete barriers instead of the metal ones that you see in DC.
So when they are deployed, they go to their maximum capacity automatically? Or do
They go to the
increase
level of the water,
with the
so
level?
they'll float up the level of the
Okay.
water. Yeah.
So the glass wall that we've seen along Compromise Street is when it's deployed. We've seen a glass wall along.
The glass wall will show you on the next slide on Compromise Street. That is solid. That is the only area around Ego Alley that is stationary. It's not deployable.
Got it.
In other words, you'll have the lower brick wall and then you have the glass above it. And that is the only area that is being, and the glass goes up to 8 feet. The lower brick goes up to 5 and the glass goes up to 8. But that is the only area that is actually a stationary is the word I want, stationary wall.
That requires Windex, no, joke.
Windex.
May I follow up? So the brick wall that we're looking at is 5 feet? Or just where the Donner sign is 5 feet? Because it doesn't look like the whole wall is 5 feet.
When we talk about 5 feet, we're talking 5 feet NAVD 88, which means it's above like the mean low water level. So
Okay.
it's not there, but the elevation of the sidewalk is higher than zero. So that would have to be zero for that to be a 5 foot wall. The elevation there is probably 2 feet, and then the wall is 3 feet above it to get us up to the elevation 5.
Yeah, the elevation is 2.5, so it's another 2.5 above the elevation.
So is that the existing wall that's there currently?
It'll be replaced. There is an existing wall along there, but that will all be replaced by a higher and stronger wall.
And the glass will come out of the wall, or is that a
It's fixed.
permanent fixture?
It's permanently fixed.
Permanent?
Yeah.
So Ellie, it'll be your job to do the Windex.
And we had a lot of discussion with the HBC about that because they didn't especially appreciate the glass wall. They felt like we were building an aquarium type situation that, with all the glass up. So I think that will only be the only location for a glass wall because we had discussed having it more extensive around Eagle Alley and that wasn't well accepted.
And you're gonna, you're going to look at Whiting Turner for value engineering suggestions if they see these, because I know that when we presented in front of Netherlands, they were like, why do you have all these different methods? So could we just quickly go back to the plan view again? As far as the AMRP scope of work, does that include the Burtis House, and is Whiting Turner looking at that new Harbor Master building? Is that part of the?
So they're looking at the new Harbor Master building.
Okay.
We originally were going to have that Harbor Master building here where the pump station. But instead, to allow this to be a clear area all the way through, we decided to move it up by the Burtis House. So there's some discussion about that because we have to have the generator and all the electrical controls for the pump station up at the Harbor Master. So we're going to run all that electrical service from that Harbor Master building down to the pump station to help clear that. But yeah, so instead of building a building where the pump station is, we're going to build it down where it says Harbor Master building. The Burtis House was not ever part of this project because we didn't even own it at that time. So that will be added, and we expect that there's a big effort going on to get grants for that building because the National Park Service will probably be in that, plus some heritage items for watermen and so forth.
So this is the snapshot of where everything is right now, with the Harbor Master being there.
And the Harbor Master building will include the maritime gateway. That will be, showers, bathrooms. Some people need to wash their clothes if they're coming in off a boat. A room for people to gather. So that will be at the ground level of the Harbor Master building. So it'll be something terrific that the city hasn't had, and that is really a place for people both from land and sea to gather.
Yeah, and I suspect this will have an impact on the 40 million. A new building, basically. Okay. All right. Back to Joey.
I think that's the best diagram we've seen.
Yeah. Director Dickinson.
All right, so now we're going to move on and talk about the refinancing. We went through some of this with you in our meetings that we had earlier. We want to refinance the sub-debt. As we talked about, the interest rate on that debt is higher than what we would pay on our own bonds. And there's adjustments throughout the life of the debt for inflation, which is going to make it even more expensive. The total interest cost over time was somewhere around 9.25% for a 30-year rate. That's very high. We're hoping to get somewhere in the fives for our debt. We are by the time we go to pay this off, the sub-debt principal will be about $21.9 million. The way we're proposing to handle the refinancing is if you remember, we talked about the concession payment that went into the city dock. Part of the concession payment was from the Series A bonds, the senior debt, and the rest of it was from the sub-debt. And we're going to use the concession payment, $13.5 million, from the sub-debt to repay the sub-debt. Then we're going to issue our own tax-exempt bonds for $13.5 million and put those in the project to replace that concession payment that we took out. Then we're going to issue another $8.4 million of taxable bonds to pay off the rest of the sub-debt. So that sounds a little confusing as the way we're doing that, but that is because it is the method of refinancing that will give us the most savings in debt service over the life of our bonds. When you issue debt as a government, it can be tax exempt as long as the proceeds are going to be used for construction. So That's why we're going to use the concession payment to pay off part of the sub-debt and then replace that with tax-exempt bonds for City Dock.
But that's just dealing with the impact of the concession payment. I'm concerned about I'm jumping ahead of the last statement there, that the cons is that the bonds would need to be repaid even if parking revenues are not sufficient. This could potentially proceed.
Yeah, so I'm,
Yeah, let's
the
talk
reason
about
that we're doing that is because over 30 years, it's going to save us a tremendous amount of dollars in debt service. In total dollars, it's $31.6 million, and this is a projected amount. But if you present value that $31.6 million, it's about $11.8 million in present value savings on debt service if we do it this way. And the one disadvantage, as you've pointed out, on the right there is that this is general obligation bonds. Anytime we issue a general obligation bond, the full faith and credit of the city is put behind the bond. So if the parking revenues that are going to pay this debt were not sufficient, and there was no other recourse, the citizens, the city has to decide how to pay those bonds. It is recourse to the city. So we don't anticipate that because the parking revenue flow is projected to exceed the debt service, but that's the only con to doing the general obligation bonds. Puts the debt on the books of the city.
And remember that we have a little bit of cushion because we have that $1 million that we estimate is going to come out of the bottom of the waterfall. So all that revenue would have to go away, plus whatever the savings are from refinance would have to go away in order to start the general fund to have to pay for the refinance bonds. So we have a substantial amount of cushion. We certainly don't want to have to use that because we want all of that money to go to the parking fund. But that's the cushion, is that waterfall would have to completely go away in order to ever get to the general fund having to pay for the refinanced bonds.
But our effort on this is, what's the time frame again?
Time frame of what?
When we would know that we,
30 years, the same as the sub-debt. I mean, the senior debt and the sub-debt are out 30 years from the time of the time the bonds were sold in September. So we're 30 years out from that. So this is across 30 years.
right,
You know, we try to project, the projections that we used were not ours, they were done by a consultant,
right,
being very conservative out 30 years,
right,
ensuring that that was enough to serve the senior debt, to pay the operations costs. There's adjustments for
Right.
cost increases all the way out, still projecting the $1 million from the waterfall.
right.
And then if we do this refinancing, that number should be bigger.
It's really important that before Hillman is done, that we get a professional evaluation of parking rates. I know.
No, you said rates, not
Rates.
parking rates.
Yeah,
So,
and we agree, and we had planned to do that because we have to keep a certain amount of coverage. So we had planned to, like we do for the water and sewer funds, every year we'll have a consultant to advise us on revenue and how much the rate should be. You know, David Hyder does that now and has for years. And we would use somebody like that, a parking rate expert, to advise us every single year. We discussed that with AMRP because,
Right, so-
of course, they're concerned about this as well, at least while they still hold the sub-debt.
Yeah.
They're concerned about making sure that the rates are appropriately set.
Yeah, because there is some reassurance that this agreement was based on conservative numbers. Okay,
And again, only the city has the ability to change the rates.
correct.
So we have to keep that amount of coverage for the bonds, but we have the ability to change the rates.
Alderman-
Okay, I'm going to ask us to dumb it down for me, make sure I'm getting this correct. the concession payment that we receive is 13.5 million.
No, so we received.
That's part
yes,
of,
right,
I'm sorry, that's part of
yes,
the 25 million that we get in concession
Correct.
payments. One-time payment or over time, the concession payment?
one time,
One time. Okay, so we're going to take 13.5 of the concession payment and we're going to pay off the indebtedness so that it will no longer be AMRP's debt, it will become our debt. And we're assuming that debt over a 30-year period, assuming that we're going to generate revenue each year to help us meet that bond payment.
yes, because we are already projecting to be able to pay the sub-debt to AMRP. So as our debt service is projected to be much lower, we will even have more net parking revenue come to us yearly.
And as you've demonstrated to us many times, the closer to the end of the bond, the more benefit it is to us, correct?
Yes, and what I'll add is another advantage that we don't show here. When we take on the debt, after 10 years, we can refinance that debt at any time. If we keep the sub-debt, we can refinance after 10 years, but there's a penalty that the developer was going to charge for that refinancing, and it almost negated the savings that we would get. So this way, we can refinance it if the market terms ever become beneficial and rates drop back down. After 10 years, we can call the bonds and refinance those. So it's more flexibility on our part if we have it as general obligation bonds.
That was going to be my next question or assumption. Okay, then I'm good. Thank you.
There was a discussion at the city council meeting. Alderman Gay asked about money from this that could be used for other things, and I was a little bit concerned because I thought this was all under, sort of a, excuse the engineering term, but sort of a closed loop. Could you speak to that?
So his idea is he wants to take $1 million from the $13.5 million that you see up there and use it for other purposes. That part of the concession payment was the only one that could be used for anything other than construction, meaning we could use that for transit, we could have used it for anything. The other part that you don't see up there, the other part of the $25 million can only be used for construction. So he would like to take part of the 13.5 and use it for something else, not to pay off the sub-debt, but, well, to use it for another purpose, and then we'd have to figure out how otherwise to pay off the sub-debt. Because we got to pay it off in total. We can't pay it off in pieces.
May I ask how that wouldn't we have to approve a change in the agreement? Or I know that's our part of the agreement.
The change
So
in
that
what
would be
agreement?
if we decide to reallocate funds.
So I don't know what you mean by the agreement. Are you talking about we just did a bond ordinance where we asked the council for authority to do this refinancing. It would change the numbers within that refinancing, but we asked you for a maximum amount. So I think that we would still have enough to do it. It's just wouldn't be as beneficial financially.
I think you're talking about the concession agreement, that it would change the terms of that.
Well, but this isn't, the concession agreement doesn't dictate how we use the funds. So that would be our internal, I guess.
Correct.
That's correct.
Proposal.
So the only, we
okay.
just have to make it work here as to how we would do this then. We'd have to reshuffle some of the numbers on the
Right,
refinancing.
so, I think there's a misunderstanding. I haven't talked to him about it, but I think there's a misunderstanding. I don't think Alderman Gay, I think he thinks it's part of this one upfront payment. It's a chunk of money that can be utilized. I don't believe he knows it's tied up in if we take it now and use it for another reason, we're gonna have to find the money somewhere else. I mean, there's a risk in doing that right now.
Yeah, because
We
that,
might-
the
it would-
city dock isn't fully funded already,
Right.
so if we start pulling out pieces
Yeah.
of that concession, that makes the underfunding more severe.
And you're dealing with capital monies? I mean, you say something else, but I think his interest is, well, it could be a capital expense, but
And he's interested in funding affordable housing in some way.
yeah.
And then he talked about a couple of ideas, but I wouldn't be the one to talk about specifics.
I would suggest we look at that as a separate capital project and keep this intact. You might if you don't encourage. Right, yeah, just not mess this up. That's a better way of putting it. Okay, all right, thanks. Alderman O'Neill?
I don't have another question. I just want to say thank you. The way this was presented makes it very, very clear and easy for me to take to constituents in a way that I feel most confident, where before I was just sort of talking round numbers. So thank you very much for the work that you put into this presentation for us. I appreciate that.
The
See,
last,
if it were up to me, I'd probably have a lot more details in here that you wouldn't want to see and would
Yeah.
confuse everybody. They help me simplify this.
And
Well,
we
I
can,
learned
and we
that-
can provide this deck to you if you'd
oh,
like.
that would be great, that was gonna
Yeah.
be my question.
We'll send it to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, my constituents obviously pay attention because the bond ordinance got their attention, and, the reaction that I forwarded, to David was, oh, wait, I thought we weren't going to be using our money and all that kind of stuff. So we had to explain, and this is very helpful. A question that ties into this, the pump station over here, as she points, the Compromise Street pump station, I know one thought was the bid came in and it's over budget, that there could be some economy of scale in adding it into this project. Is that the status right now?
That is. So we sent a letter to Whiting Turner to ask them to let us know if they would be interested in considering that. They would, but they ask us to pay their costs for breaking this up into bid packages and going out and getting bids. If we continue with the project with them, then those costs will go away. They won't charge us. But
roll
if we
into it.
if we get the numbers and then say, well, thank you, sorry, we're not going to use your numbers, then we would have to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working on that agreement right now to get that in place for them to get started with that work of breaking it into bid packages and putting it out for bids.
Do they do traffic pole work? No, that was a bad joke. Sorry, bad joke. Anyways,
May I ask though, I thought the pumping station on Newman Street was finished.
No, we finished the design. So that was a design bid build project. So the design's complete. We put it out for bids earlier this summer, and it was a bid bust. We only got one bid,
Okay,
and
I
it
do
was
remember
extraordinarily high. So we looked for other alternatives and decided, at least initially, to see if it would make sense for Whiting Turner to do it as part of this whole package, because they're going to be working right next to where that project work is. So we think it makes sense to do it. So that's why we're pursuing that option right now.
So did we do anything besides the playground?
So what we did there was the archaeological work ahead of the pump station project.
Okay.
So that all that digging that was done there was to see if there were any archaeological remains in there. So that's all been done. So we know that what's there and what's not there. And then the
Okay.
memorial was done right after.
I thought that was pretty much on its way, but I do recall you saying you only got
Yeah.
one bidder, and it wasn't a
Yeah.
good one at that, so, okay. Well, I agree, thank you for dumbing it down for us. And I think having a copy of this we can share with anyone who has additional questions, but I appreciate it.
and we may ask for another update in a certain period of time. I'm
Yeah.
not sure when that is, because it's been very helpful. And and tell my,
I want to thank you for your thoughtful questions. I wrote David a note, and we both agreed. The reason we do these jobs is discussions like this today, really thoughtful, positive, and great information based on your discussion with us. Thank you.
thank you so much.
If I could just mention, kind of off topic, but we'd also like to do a general CIP update. We did that a few years ago, went through all the projects, not in great detail like we did this, but just sort of high level update on all the projects. So we'd love to do that if you'd like, we can get that
Oh my
scheduled.
God.
That would be great.
That would be great. Yeah, I know, I think you're coming to the next city council to address the traffic one, but, just as a whole to make sure, yeah. Okay. Well,
Is that the last slide? I guess so, that's good.
that's about as detailed as we need,
Yeah.
Jody. I got, that's.
You said something on page, and it's like, never get all this.
Oh, this is pretty good. This is pretty
Yeah,
good.
this could fit on one page, it would just be like 4-point print or something, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll accept a motion to adjourn because I think we've heard from.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.